For many months, Theresa May has ruled out any extension to the Brexit process. But today, in the face of opposition from within her own cabinet, she blinked. She told the Commons that if MPs reject her Brexit deal next month, then they will get to vote on whether Britain should leave with no deal or have a short delay. The concession came with the warning that delaying Brexit could bring about a much sharper cliff edge just 3 months later. Fresh from his own Brexit U-turn, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said her policy was grotesquely reckless. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
One of the weird things today was you'd think the moment Theresa May went anywhere near the idea of extending the date of Brexit, it would strike terror into the hearts of the hardline Brexiteers. And yet, when you came away from it today and looked at the different moods around and who was smiling and who wasn't, those hardline Brexiteers don't seem to think that this does mean their worst nightmare. They always used to think extending the date would somehow open the door to losing Brexit altogether. There'd be a really long extension, or an extension that then rolls on and on. Somehow they just don't seem to think this is where we are heading. They might have to revisit that. It all could turn out to be very different. But they seem to be the people, strangely perhaps, with smiles, or at least, as one of them said, I'm not frothing at the mouth. So maybe not smiles so much, but more sanguine. It does look as well today as though this was a moment when we truly realised that the date of 29th March, actually leaving on that date, is looking pretty difficult to achieve. It is quite a stretch. The only way you can really see it happening is in the sort of sense that you put money across and it takes a few days for the cheque to clear. We might have worked out where we're heading if she got really lucky with a vote on the deal, but that date does look as though it's not going to happen. Other things we learned today: golly, the splits in the cabinet sound like they were on full display in that cabinet meeting today. Quite a lot of vitriol towards people who'd threatened effectively to resign. Also, though, splits on display in a shadow cabinet meeting. MPs, members of the shadow cabinet, who hated the idea of a second referendum, pretty much frothing at the mouth, I think, and airing their grievances about that. But the real thing I think that we learnt today is that U-turn that Theresa May never wanted to make, the thing that she kept telling us again and again wouldn't happen. The date would stay. Today, that date looks in doubt. In 24 hours, both main party leaders have had to adopt positions they'd sworn themselves against. Yesterday, Jeremy Corbyn, the man who never wanted to go near the idea of a second referendum, said he would start backing the idea. Now the Prime Minister has had to unveil a commitment that goes against something she's said, by some counts, more than 100 times.
The United Kingdom will cease to be a member of the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
Britain is leaving the European Union in March 2019.
29th of March 2019 when we leave the European Union.
Are you prepared to resign?
The cast iron commitment was melted down at Cabinet today to stop some ministers effectively walking out. Many Cabinet ministers turned on the potential quitters in what were described as some acid exchanges. Liz Truss called them kamikaze ministers. Those under attack, including the Welfare Secretary and the Justice Secretary, huddling together for support as they left, got a concession, and Theresa May announced the new approach in the Commons.
The government will, on the 14th of March, bring forward a motion on whether Parliament wants to seek a short, limited extension to Article 50. And if the House votes for an extension, seek to agree that extension approved by the House with the EU and bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension.
So, if Theresa May lost the vote on her deal next month, under the Prime Minister's new plans, MPs could then get a vote on whether to leave with no deal or not. If they voted no to a no-deal Brexit, there would the next day be a vote on whether to seek a delay to the Brexit deadline. Theresa May says that shouldn't be more than 3 months long, at the end of which Britain would either leave with a renegotiated deal or in a no-deal Brexit.
A short extension, not beyond the end of June, would almost certainly have to be a one-off. If we had not taken part in the European Parliament elections, it would be extremely difficult to extend again. So it would create a much sharper cliff edge in a few months' time. An extension cannot take no deal off the table.
Do you think the ministers who were threatening to effectively walk out of the government here have been sold a bit of a pup?
I think that's exactly right. It is delayed. No deal is still very much there, and any extension of Article 50, if the European Union agree to it, is only going to be, we understand, for a maximum of about 3 months. So at the end of that period, we could still be leaving without a deal. So
Pleasure deferred for you.
Well, I wouldn't have put it exactly that way.
A few in the Brexit camp think somehow it'll end up a longer extension than Theresa May would like.
The idea that it would be a short extension of 2 or 3 months is laughable. There'd be no one to negotiate with. Brussels closes down in April because the whole of Europe is fighting European elections.
So you think there'll be European elections here in Britain?
I increasingly think that we'll be fighting European elections here on May the 23rd, yes.
The Prime Minister was repeatedly asked what a short extension of the Brexit date was actually for.
She is simply continuing to run down the clock. She promises a short extension, but for what?
Prime Minister, will you accept the overwhelming advice of business, of MPs and your cabinet? Rule out no deal, extend Article 50, but do it today.
If he wants to end uncertainty, if he wants to deal with the issues he raised, if he wants to end the uncertainty and deal with the issues he raised in his response to my statement, then he should vote for a deal. Simples.
Combative talk at the end of a day that saw a bruising cabinet, a major U-turn, and no deal still in play, maybe more likely.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, as you heard, the delay has not gone down well with a number of Brexiteers. So where does this leave the European Research Group, the powerful backbench group of Tory Brexiteers? They helped vote down Theresa May's deal when it went before the Commons in January. But earlier, I spoke to one of their number, the former Conservative leader, Ian Duncan Smith.
Well, I'm content with what the Prime Minister said because I don't think much has changed. She's still in the middle of these negotiations and she's just said, look, wait till we come back. And it seems like some of my colleagues who are being a little bit keen on resigning have now decided they're not resigning at the moment and they'll wait. So clearly it kind of process worked, I think.
Well, as a master of the old guerrilla tactics yourself, don't you feel a bit of pity for your opponents? Feel perhaps you could do a bit of tuition?
Well, I'm certainly not in the business of lecturing or teaching lessons to my colleagues, but I have a very simple point. If they believe it passionately and strongly, and these things, leave and remain, are passionately held by lots and lots of people. But I do think the government has a purpose to try and get the changes made to their present agreement.
If the EU offer a long extension, I mean a year or 2 years, what will you do?
Well, I don't think the government's going to ask for that. I think it would be quite wrong to ask for a long extension for no purpose. I think
they may not let us have a short one.
Well, that's exactly the point. So I think you hit the nail on the head. The issue here isn't about extensions, it's what kind of extension are we talking about. If you have a longer extension, say lasting a year, you're straight into the issues of, do you then have a second referendum? Are we actually going to leave?
So you'd vote against it?
Where are we going? Oh, I'm very much opposed to it on the basis that I'm opposed to a second referendum because I think we had the vote. But I think it would be.
But if the Prime Minister
misleading.
asked you to vote for it, you wouldn't?
I don't believe I would do, because it would be misleading, I think, to say to the British people, you had a vote, but now we're going to extend again, because immediately the whole argument would reopen.
Mrs May has said that no deal is better than a bad deal, but she seems to have stepped back from that.
Well, I still believe that that's what she believes, that no deal is better than a bad deal. She believes, however, that she has a good deal.
You thought the deal she brought up was a bad deal.
Well, I
she's
did.
likely to bring it back.
Yes, but it has to have changes, and these are the key points. The legally binding changes to two things. The Malthouse Compromise, myself, Leavers and Remainers came together to agree what would we think would work. We've presented that. There is some momentum on that, because the EU has now accepted that they can't run their existing agreement, they have to make changes. Those changes are going to be based on what we put forward.
On March the 14th, there'll be an amendable motion.
Yes.
And that amendment could be brought forward by those who do want several years extension of Article 50. What will you do then? They could win.
Well, they could win, and it's always been a problem, and this is a big problem you highlight quite rightly. The problem is that the public voted one way, and as you know, Parliament is almost certainly in a majority to remain. It hasn't accepted the result of the referendum. For all the voting for Article 50 and all the rest, What you get, for example, with the Labour Party in the last night or so has been that they've decided they're going to change their position yet again to actually go for a second referendum. They ruled that out before, so we're now getting to the stage where politicians aren't even standing by their original pledges because they're trying to find ways around.
And you know why that is, because it gets more and more complicated the nearer you get to actually having a decision. And that's why everybody is in a shambles.
Yes, but we need to make that decision. I believe we're quite close to that. I think if we get this negotiation right now, and I think the EU does not want us to face that point where we leave without a deal, that's without a withdrawal agreement, we'd still have some kind of arrangement or a deal.
But all sorts of ministers are saying we're not ready.
Well, I think we are hugely ready. There are many, many areas that have now done.
So you know better than the ministers?
Well, to be fair, I look at what they've actually declared they've done and all the statutory instruments that have come forward for all the changes that have been made. I simply have a simple point. Ministers are there to deliver on what government objectives are. If they haven't delivered, then maybe it's time to look for other ministers. But my simple point is this. The UK will be ready to leave when we leave on the 29th of March. If there's any implementation point, that's fine. And then we're into a 2-year implementation period for changes other than that. So this, if it works, will work well. But it is important to remember that the British people voted to leave, and we did vote for Article 50, and we all voted by a massive majority. If we don't deliver on that, I think what comes after that is a real disgust with the nature of politics in the UK, and I think that will be unsustainable for all of us.
Ian Duncan-Smith, thanks for talking to us.
Well, more from Westminster later, but more on Brexit here in the studio now, because the government has tonight given its own assessment of the economic impact of a no deal, and it is a sobering read. It accepts that the flow of goods through Dover and the Channel Tunnel could be significantly reduced for months, and that could push up food prices. And it says a big part of the problem is that many businesses are still not preparing for no deal. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is here. So, Helia, give us a kind of executive summary of this report, if you can.
I mean, Kathy, this report makes for very stark reading. In essence, it says, despite all the government's efforts to prepare for a no-deal Brexit and a £4 billion budget, Britain is not ready. The government's not ready. Companies are not ready. And the impact is likely to be severe. More severe, indeed, than the Treasury's assessment at the back end of last year, which claimed that there could be a 9% hit to the UK GDP over 15 years. Just to give you a scale of the risk, the Department for Brexit admits that now a third of critical no-deal projects within government are not on track. Or, for example, only 6 out of 40 trade deals being signed have actually been done.
And what about, that's for government, but what about the business preparations?
Well, the government here are admitting that there's little evidence that businesses are preparing in earnest for a no-deal Brexit. To give you an example, only 40,000 out of 240,000 UK companies that trade with Europe have a critical piece of documentation in place that they'll need. And the report goes on to say that this is going to lead to huge problems with customs and with delays. Specifically, they say as a result of French checks and lack of business readiness, the flow of goods through the short channel crossing, that's Dover and Eurotunnel, could be significantly reduced. They say this will have an impact on food prices and even shortages.
And just briefly, the report waxes rather lyrical on Northern Ireland, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's particularly sharp warnings there, because here they outline business failures, unemployment, even electricity impacts, and an increase in smuggling and associated criminality. I mean, this report overall reads like a huge piece of warning rather than a bureaucratic update from government.
Helia, thanks very much. Well, Theresa May's plan could mean MPs are offered the chance to vote to delay Brexit by extending Article 50, as we've heard. But is there any guarantee that the European Union would agree to such a move? A little earlier, I spoke to the German MEP, Joe Leinen, and I began by asking him whether the 27 EU states would unanimously agree to extend Article 50.
We don't like the extension of Article 50, but if it would help to prevent a no-deal Brexit, I think then there are many people in Brussels who would say, let's do it. But we should get a message from London what we will do in the extension period. Will we still stick to the old positions, or is there a movement towards a deal?
Well, what do you want the UK to do in that extension period?
Now, we still have the squaring of the circle. If UK is not part of anything of the common market or the customs union, we necessarily get a border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So either there is a solution that Britain stays in the customs union, then you have no border, or they go out of the customs union and then you get somehow a border. So you cannot have both. You have to decide what you want.
But equally, if we leave without a deal, a hard border goes up in Ireland. So isn't it in the interests of Germany and the rest of the EU also to make concessions which at the moment have not been forthcoming?
Now, I think we are pretty clear to protect the integrity of the common market rules, because Brexit would be a precedent for the future. So somehow we should look on alternative solutions, but that is now the job of Downing Street number 10 to present us alternative solutions that are workable for the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. We haven't seen anything that works.
The fact that you're putting this back to the UK to come up with proposals suggests to some why we're now heading for a delay. So how long, in your view, would a delay be? A long delay or a short delay?
It is pretty much excluded to delay Article 50 beyond this legislature. That means the 1st of July, because in May we have the elections to the European Parliament. So either Britain should take part in the European elections in May, then an extension is possible even beyond the 1st of July. If not, it can only go for 2 months.
Do you trust Theresa May?
I have my doubts, but doubts are not helpful. Hope dies at the very last moment. So let's hope that there is still the will to have a deal and not only a game for a no deal.
What do you think is the most likely scenario now? A deal, no deal, stay in the EU, or have a second referendum?
I hope for a last-minute deal, either still in March or then at the latest in June. If not, of course, I mean, an alternative solution would be people's vote to start a new game with letting the British people say again what they want exactly.
Joe Leinen, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, goodbye.
Joe Leinen, a German Social Democrat MEP, talking to Cathy earlier. Now, the Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood had indicated he would vote against the government in order to stop a no-deal Brexit. Is he now satisfied by the Prime Minister's concessions today? He joins us now from the lobby of the House of Commons. Tobias Ellwood, were you sold a pup?
Not at all. I mean, this was a major moment here when the concept of no deal came under the microscope. And when you step back and ask those big questions, does it answer what the referendum was looking for in bringing our country together? I think the answer to that is no. Does it help prosperity with WTO terms and the tariffs it would introduce? I think the answer is no. From a security perspective, would it make us safer? No, because we'd lose sight of the threat picture that we work with our European colleagues. And would it actually help in Northern Ireland? Well, under a no deal, we'd actually see the return of a hard border. All of this is not in the interest of Britain, and that's why it was so important that Prime Minister today introduced the architecture to prevent us walking headfirst into a no deal.
But alas, it is not off the agenda. There is no absolute guarantee that there will not be a no vote, a no deal.
You're correct, and actually the way to confirm that we avoid no deal is actually by supporting a deal, supporting the Prime Minister's deal. That will come back in 2 weeks' time when we have the meaningful vote. In the event that the meaningful vote does not pass, there will be an opportunity, as you heard from the Prime Minister today, to actually confirm the Parliament's intent to rule out no deal. And I hope that's exactly what happens if her deal is not supported.
Given that she herself admits that there's only tinkering going on, and the last effort at any kind of a deal was voted down by over 200 votes, the idea that this is going to get through again is pretty remote.
I'm not sure the Attorney General would consider the work that he's doing as tinkering. He's looking for some reassurances on the longevity of the backstop to assure Brexiteers that it will not be there in perpetuity. But we need to recognise that unless we get this across the line, yes, we face some difficult times. But let's take us back to the Brady Amendment. That passed, that confirmed support for the Prime Minister's deal under two conditions. One, that we leave with a deal, and secondly, that the Northern Ireland backstop was reconsidered. So it shows that 95% of this jigsaw gains the support of Parliament. It's this one aspect that we need to sort out to get it across the line, and I hope that will be very much the case in the next couple of weeks.
You're a defence minister. This is one of the most serious decisions made since Britain went to war with Germany all those years ago, and the European Union was all about preventing that ever happening again. You cannot, hand on heart, really believe that Mrs May's authority still stands. It's shot.
Well, the details of the written agreement and the protocols that then followed that allow us to continue to have a very close working partnership with the EU. But you're right, when you imply, what is our partnership if we don't get a deal? There are some big problems around the world. From where I sit, the world is getting more dangerous and more complex. Our threats are getting more diverse. The ideals, the norms that the West has enjoyed are being threatened. We need to work with Western countries to stand up and update the rules-based order that we created after the Second World War. That will become a lot harder if we fall out with our European partners and head towards no deal.
I think there are many people who admire you for your courage, Mr Tobias, but the truth of the matter is this is a desperate moment, and it's very hard to see how anybody has any confidence whatever that Mrs May can do anything.
Well, I understand why you put those questions forward. All I would say is the gravity of the moment is not lost on any parliamentarian. Where we are today, the distraction that Brexit has been, the desire for us to get back on the international stage, to help shape it, to help be a force for good, is not lost on any of us. But I'm afraid there has been a caucus that's chosen the very people, the architects of Brexit itself, have actually hindered the Prime Minister getting the deal across the line. I hope the focus of today, in recognising that we may need to extend Article 50, will make those people reconsider and support the Prime Minister.